Hi, and welcome to another episode of the School Sucks podcast. I'm super excited that you're here watching us live, or if you're here watching us on YouTube, or if you're listening anywhere you catch your podcast. Thank you for being a part of what we're doing here with School Sucks. If this is your first time, welcome. Feel free to hit that subscribe button to our channel so that you always get updates and videos when we post new content. And if you are listening via iTunes or Spotify or wherever you hit your podcast, make sure you give us a 5-star rating if you love what you hear. Today, I'm really excited about this episode because I am going to be speaking with someone amazing. His name is Nir Eyal, and Nir is an expert in behavioral scientist. He's a best-selling author. He's a former educator, and he is going to be dropping some major knowledge on us. So without further ado, check out this conversation that I had with Nir. Technical difficulties. Nir, thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, great to be here, Mike. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, awesome. So one of the first things I love to do is I like to give my guests the runway to introduce themselves so that I don't leave anything out and so that I don't butcher anything. So would you first tell us, who are you and what do you do? What are you passionate about? Those kind of things.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Nir Eyal, and I am what you call a behavioral designer. So I use consumer psychology and behavioral design to build the kind of products and services that people use because they want to, not because they have to.
Yeah.
So I specialize in habit formation. I taught for many years at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Then I moved over to the Hasso Plattner Institute of Design, where I taught a class that became my first book, which was titled Hooked: How to Build Habit Forming Products. And the point of that book was to democratize the techniques that companies like Facebook and Twitter and Amazon and Google, all these big tech companies use to get us hooked. Not for their benefit. They already know these techniques. What I wanted to do was to democratize these techniques so that anybody out there building any sort of company can use these very same tactics to build habit-forming products. What kind of habit-forming products? Education products, healthcare products, enterprise products. I also do angel investing, and so I look for companies that are building habits, and some of my best investments have been in the educational space, which I know is a space very near and dear to your heart, trying to figure out how to use primarily technology products to help people build healthy habits in their lives, to help them do the things that they want to do, but for whatever reason are not doing. So that was my first book, Hooked, and now more recently I wrote my second book titled Indistractable. And Indistractable is the other side of the coin, that if Hooked is about how do we build good habits, Indistractable is about how do we break the bad habits. And so that's what I've been doing for the past almost 10 years now, is researching how to break these bad habits as well. And so over the past 5, I started to write this book, Indistractable, for me more than anyone else, that I wanted to learn how I could finally do whatever it is that I said I was going to do. Because I found it was a serious problem in my own life that I would say I was going to do one thing and I didn't do it, right? I would say I was going to work out, I didn't. I would say I was going to eat healthfully, I wouldn't. I would say I was going to work on that big project, and yet somehow I'd do something else. So I really wanted to get down to the deeper psychology behind why we get distracted. And part of the motivation was that I really wasn't satisfied with these chicken little tech critics that we hear these days telling us technology is addicting us, it's hijacking our brains, there's nothing we can do about it. Because one, I don't think that's true, and I think it's super disempowering, and it leads to learned helplessness. And so what I wanted to do was to figure out, how do we provide people with a tech positive approach that doesn't say, okay, go on a digital detox, or disconnect your phone and stop using Facebook and Twitter. But no, how can we use these tools in a way that serves us as opposed to us serving them?
And both of those are so awesome. And we have this, we're building this high school program at our school, and the stuff from the Stanford business school seems to keep seeping into this program. So I'll have to talk to you more about that later. It's
Absolutely.
interesting. We have two graduates from Stanford Business School that work at our school. So it's
Very cool.
so they love bringing that in, and I was like, this is cool. Hooked is very interesting to me because one of the things that I, I've done an episode on this before. One of the things that I have come to believe through my experience in education is that grades cheapen learning, and we have to figure out, like, I always say to people, like, no kid has trouble getting on TikTok and spending it. So, like, we got to figure out what's the science behind that and put it into the classroom. Right. So I like. Right. If you were to pick a few things from Hooked that would be transformative for maybe building a classroom experience, what would they be?
Yeah, so the biggest one would be variable rewards. So variable rewards, this comes out of the work of B.F. Skinner, who is the father of operant conditioning. He did these famous experiments in the 1950s and 60s where he took pigeons and he put them in a little box. Today we call it a Skinner box. And he allowed these pigeons to peck at a disc to receive a reward, to get a little food pellet. And what he found was that he could train these pigeons to peck at the disc whenever they were hungry. If they weren't hungry, they wouldn't peck the disc. So just like you can't make a kid or a user of a product, you can't make them do what you want them to do. They have to want to do it in themselves. Just like these pigeons, they had to be hungry. They had to have what we call an internal trigger. But as long as they were hungry, they would peck at the disc and get a reward. And then one day, Skinner realized that he had a bit of a problem. That one day when he walked into the lab, he didn't have enough of these food pellets. He ran out of them. And he only had enough to give a reward to the pigeon every once in a while. So sometimes the pigeon would peck at the disc and no reward, no food pellet would come out. The next time the pigeon would peck at the disc, they would receive a reward. And what Skinner observed, to his amazement, was that the rate of response, the number of times the pigeon pecked at the disc, increased when the reward was given on a variable schedule of reinforcement. Oh. Why am I telling you this? How does all this have to do with education? Because what we find is endemic to every product that engages us, that causes us to pay attention, that creates these new habits. You will find a variable reward. Mm-hmm. So we see this, of course, you mentioned TikTok or Facebook or Instagram. It's all about variability. What did my friends post? What do the comments say? How many likes did I get? Yes. It's all about uncertainty. When you think about what makes a movie fun to watch, right? If somebody tells you how the movie ends, it's not so much fun. You want the mystery around how's this going to wrap up. Sports, why do we love watching a ball bounce around a court or a pitch? It's about the variability. Where's the ball going to go? Who's going to win the game? It's all about uncertainty. News, the first three letters of news, N-E-W, new. We want to know what's going to happen next. So this is very much part of the Socratic method, which unfortunately, in most educational institutions, we have completely forgotten. This 2,500-year-old method of prompting the student with questions. Mm-hmm. Questions inherently are variable. There's uncertainty. When I ask you a question, I don't know. What's the answer? Yeah. I want to know. As opposed to today, the modern model of teaching for the past 100 years or so of public education is, okay, everybody sit down and you're going to listen to me talk at you, right? I don't want to hear from you. I'm just going to be the sage on the stage and talk, like the Charlie Brown, wah, 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 wah. And that's crazy boring. And so the kind of companies I invest in and that I work with are the kind of companies, many of them are in the educational space. In fact, my best angel investment to date has been from a company called Kahoot. Have you heard of Kahoot?
Gosh, yeah.
You know Kahoot, right?
Oh my, it's like the hottest. Kahoot's from Austin. And it's where I am. And like every school in the country uses it.
There you go. I think it's number one or number two most used educational product in the world. 5 years ago, the CEO, Johan, called me
Yeah.
and he read my book, didn't have a product. He said, I think we have something that might fit your model. I'm going to build this. Does this work? Am I doing this right? And I said, this is pretty cool, Johan. I like it. Can I put some money in your company? And I invested. They just went public. I think they're worth now $1.3 billion.
Yeah.
It's crazy. We can absolutely use these habit forming technologies. It's not just Facebook and TikTok and those guys that need to have these secrets. We all need to use these technologies and techniques to make all sorts of products more engaging. And I think Kahoot is a wonderful example of how we can build habits for good.
Yeah. Oh man, Kahoot is like Kahoot is one of the most amazing tools to me because they figured out how to capture not only like not gamification in like the simple sense and that there's like a time, but they've captured one of the most effective leaderboards. Like we use a lot of leaderboards at our school. So like you talk about like variable rewards, I was like, yes, because we have a wall with 4 screens on it, 4 TVs, and each TV houses a different leaderboard for a separate competition because we have no at our school. So, when I think about an app like Kahoot, that's where I think of like the podium at the end. I'm like, I've always been trying to figure out how do we create an immediate competition where you see exactly how you're doing that day. And I haven't yet, but Kahoot is one of my favorites. That's awesome.
Yeah. That's a wonderful example. And it's full of variability. It's full of surprise. It's full of uncertainty. Now, I'm not saying that everything in education has to have, prizes and surprises and awards and points. I'm not saying everything needs to be like that, but there has to be some kind of uncertainty, of mystery, because that's what makes life interesting, right? Nobody told Isaac Newton, you have to do this for your term paper, right? Nobody told Einstein, you got to sit down and do this theory now, because they did that stuff because they wanted to. They were curious. So there's a wonderful quote that goes, the antidote for boredom is curiosity. There is no cure for curiosity.
Yeah.
And I think the educational system, I'm pretty sure we agree on this one, the institutionalized education system is almost designed to squish and extract all the interest that students actually have intrinsically in these topics by making them so unfun, right?
Like the lameness.
Yeah, exactly. And it's crazy. There's so many, I remember, for me, I remember everybody has these stories of teachers who really impacted their life. And for me, there were 2 teachers, I think, who really impacted my life. There's several, but 2 come to mind just in this conversation. I remember in high school, I had to take an economics class, an intro to economics, and I had to take a class on physics. I think it was like senior or junior year of high school. I don't remember. And I was so excited about physics, and I was so dreading economics. I didn't want to take economics, but I was like, oh, physics is cool because that's about like, kinetic energy and explosions and like Mr. Wizard type stuff. And I had the worst teacher in physics and the best teacher in economics. And it changed my life because now I love economics. It's amazing. It's so interesting. I hate physics and I never want to touch it again. I actually, now that I mention it, I actually would love to take it from a teacher who's awesome because I think I actually would like it. But it just goes to show you how like a different teaching style, one that engages students' curiosity, it can make a huge impact.
Yeah, I didn't have any teacher like that until I got to high school. And I just had the most unique experience ever because yesterday I got to lead a professional development training on connecting with students for my old high school, where I was talking about as like the great examples were there. And it was this cool experience because like I told them almost exactly what you said. Had I not been in Mr. Martin's speech class, I would have never been on the speech and debate team in high school or college. And I would have never done a TED Talk or any of these. I would never have a podcast, right? Like there's so many things that a great teacher can spark in a kid. So that's beautiful. I love that.
Yeah.
So I want to shift to talking about Indistractable because this book is like really near and dear to my heart because I was a kid who at 5 years old, my teacher looked at my mom and said, your son has ADHD. And my mom said, that's kind of not allowed for you to say. You're not a medical professional because my mom is also a teacher. So in Texas, you can't, like a teacher can't diagnose a kid with, but my mom looked at me and said, look, I can't afford medication. So we got to find ways for you to deal with this. And through working on just like strategies, just talking to my mom, I was able to manage my ADHD to where I legitimately forgot that I had it until I was an adult. But but trying to find ways to be focused and remove distractions has always been something I've been concerned about. And I absolutely, like, the excerpt you sent me, how to raise an indistractable kid, I loved it. I have 4 kids of my own, so I'm like gobbling this stuff up, sending it to my wife, like, look at this. So I want to start with there's a part of the excerpt called "The Answer We Don't Hear" or we don't like to hear. And you talk about like sugar and all of these things. So like, what are some of the things for the listeners that parents don't want to hear that they should be listening to?
You guys ready for this? This is gonna suck. But let me ask you before we do that, did you ever get a medical diagnosis for ADHD?
Ever.
You did not?
Mm.
Okay, interesting, because I actually think that for many people, ADHD is like so it was your teacher, not a doctor, that told you that you have ADHD.
Right.
My bet is, 1, you don't have ADHD.
So
2, the teacher was using it as an escape valve. And we find these escape valve all over the place. And so the example I talk about in the book is sugar. That every parent knows about the sugar high, don't we?
Yeah.
That if you give a kid too much sugar, what happens? They get hyper. Don't we all know that? It's all common sense, right? Here's the thing. It is not true. It is a myth. It is 100% not true. There is no such thing as a sugar high. Don't write me hate mail. Go onto Google and type in, is the sugar high real? And you will see tons of scientific articles that have proven, not proven, nothing in science is proven, but have shown through quantitative studies that there is no such thing as any kind of effect that sugar has on people, other than in terms of making them hyper, right? Of course, it has physiological effects, but not in terms of making us hyper. The only effect of the sugar high is not on the children who eat the sugar. Children do not become more hyper when you give them sugar. That is not true. The only effect of a sugar high is on, and a study found this, on the parents who think their kids were given sugar. They took parents and they told their kids had been given sugar to eat when their kid had not. And they asked them to observe their child and just watch, right? And these parents talked about how, oh, you see how he's running around like that? You see how he's acting all crazy? They criticized more. They berated the kids more. They acted ridiculous because they thought the kid had a sugar high. It is a lie. It is a myth. It is not true. It is folk psychology, not real stuff. Unfortunately, and I'm going to get in some hot water here as well, for many people, okay, let me be very careful about my words. It's the same thing with ADHD. Mm-hmm. Some of the evidence there's, by the way, if you want a full explanation on this, there's a wonderful documentary on Netflix called Take Your Pills that I highly recommend that goes into this in a lot more depth. But all you need to know is that in every other country in the world, all the other developed countries, you see about 1% of children diagnosed with ADHD. Okay, ADHD is real. I'm not saying it's not real. I'm saying that for the vast majority of people who are diagnosed with ADHD in the United States of America, they don't have ADHD.
Right.
Because everywhere else in the world, 1% of people have it. 1% of children have it. Mm-hmm. In America, 10% of children have it. 10 times as many children have this pathology? No. We are overdiagnosing. Right. It's a way to say, my kid doesn't act the way I want them to act, take some pills. Unfortunately. Not everybody. It is a real pathology for people. No doubt about it, in my mind. But the vast majority of people who put this stupid idea, like this teacher, I hate that she did this to you, told you that somehow you have a pathology that you don't have. And she had no qualification, or he or she had no qualification to tell you. And the problem with that is that we begin to tell ourselves self-defeating narratives, right? It leads to learned helplessness. I can't do that. I have ADHD. Even when you didn't, right? Because she put that bug in your ear, is very dangerous, is very damaging. Just like telling a child, oh, you had too much sugar, that's why you're hyper. Oh, okay. Well, what do? When someone sets an expectation for you, you act accordingly, right? And it's the same thing we're hearing right now with this rubbish that technology is addicting you. It's hijacking your brain. The algorithms are making you do all these things you can't control. Give me a break. It's so stupid. It's just ridiculous because it's telling people, again, your kid is acting crazy. It's the video games. It's the social media. It's the TikTok. That's what's doing it to you. It's those crazy algorithms, right? They've got their brains hijacked. They're addicted. Addicted is also a pathology. Just like telling somebody, telling a poor kid that they have ADHD, you're not qualified to say you're addicted. And addiction is a pathology. It is a disease. We can't just label everyone as being addicted. The vast majority of people are not addicted. They are distracted.
Yeah.
But when we call it what it really is, distraction, oh,
right.
crap.
Yeah.
Now I gotta do, when there's an addiction, there's a dealer, there's a pusher, there's someone doing it to me, right? But when there's a distraction, now I gotta turn off notifications. That's no fun, right? I gotta do stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think that this is kind of the bigger context of how parents, by the way, forever. This is nothing new. Today, it's social media and video games. In my generation, it was rap music, right? Rap music was making people violent. Kids are going crazy because of heavy metal is turning them into Satanists. People really said this stuff. And before that, it was comic books. And before that, it was the radio. I mean, all the way back to the written word. Every generation has a technology that's apparently melting kids' brains, and it's never the technology. There's always something deeper going on.
Yeah, I've been the parent that's like sugar high, and my wife is like that. He's always like that. He's a kid, like he's running. Yeah. And I'm like, it's interesting. One thing that I really find interesting is sort of like the vice of the day that everybody latches onto. In that same training that I had yesterday, a woman asked me, she was like, I mean, don't you think what goes on TikTok is just so bad? And I was like, look, there's more unfiltered content on Twitter than any other platform, but that one has sort of survived because the experts on Twitter are talking louder than most other people. And I don't even know if this is true, but we have a student at our school that loves chess, and he did some research and he found out that there was a point in time where parents were saying, my child is playing this stupid game called chess too much.
Right? Oh my gosh. No doubt about it. With bicycles,
right?
Bicycles were terrible technology that were going to turn women into lascivious, people who are going to do all kinds of sinful things. I mean, literally every technology that we think is mundane, no big deal, at some point, parents hated.
And I think there was a guy who he did this YouTube video called "Parents Get in the Way," and he was this teacher, and he's like, in my experience, I have never had a problem with quote unquote trouble students. I've never had a problem with kids misbehaving. It's the parents that are misbehaving most of the time because they're doing things. I mean, I've had so many parents over my teaching career that's like, I'm going to take your phone unless I'm going to pull you out of sports and that never helps the kid. So
never helps. Never. And fundamentally it's parents and teachers, by the way. Teachers should be blamed here as well, because the thing that's unique about parents and teachers is that they both want to control children.
Yes.
They both want to control. So whenever our children don't do what we say they should do and think they should do, and they don't live up to our expectations of what they should do, we get very upset.
Yep.
And we look for, well, what is the reason? Any reason other than, it's an autonomous human being.
Yes.
And you also, when you were a kid, didn't like to be told what to, I still don't like to be told what to do now as an adult. Nobody likes to be told what to do. Yeah. But there are only two places in society where we can tell people where to go, what to think, what to do, who to be friends with, how to dress, and that's school and prison. And so is it any shocker that when we put people in cages and treat them like animals, they behave as such?
Right.
And that's what children do. When we put them in these mini prisons all day and constantly tell them what to do, this is called psychological reactance. This is a known human phenomenon. Every human being on the face of the earth does not like to be told what to do all day. We need freedom. It's one of, according to self-determination theory, the primal the pillars of human well-being and flourishing requires autonomy, competency, and relatedness. So when when we clamp down on a person's autonomy, they naturally rebel. We want autonomy. We need autonomy for psychological flourishing. And grasping at something I can control, whether it's TikTok or football or my friends or something that is mine, is a reaction to this symptom, to this dysfunction that I think many kids live under.
Yeah, man, that is powerful. And for anyone that thinks that the school to prison comparison is overblown, I need to find the exact percentage, but there's a staggering percentage of American high schools that were like the architect that designed that school was also the designer of a prison. And so
Yeah. There's a study I cite in my book with the work of Peter Gray, and Peter Gray has shown that children today have 10 times the amount of restrictions placed upon them as the average adult, twice as many restrictions as the average incarcerated felon.
Wow.
That we put twice as many rules on our kids as we do people in prison.
That is insane.
Right? How many times a day do we tell children, don't do this, do that, do this? It's makes anybody crazy. Not that, by the way, I'm not saying, I'm not a free range parent. I'm not saying do anything you want with your kids. Hey, I do think children need constraints. I do think that's how we achieve our best. We need some kind of guidance in our life. But I think what's happened recently, and it always goes hand in hand. The parents whose kids are struggling with too much distraction, too much technology, there's always something going on. It's never a perfect happy story where the parent and the child can sit together and have a nice civil conversation about how can we put distraction in its place. If they could, they wouldn't be having these problems.
Right.
It's always the child is looking for some kind of escape. And when they cannot find the psychological nutrients they are looking for offline, this is called the needs displacement hypothesis. It's been around for decades. When we cannot find what we are looking for in the real world, we look for those things in the virtual world.
Yeah, all sorts of applications to that. Like, yeah, digital.
And by the way, one thing that I think is super important to realize here when we talk about this distinction between, is tech good, is tech bad, is social media harmful, is it not harmful? Look, I'm not saying we need more social media, right? I think it's perfectly reasonable to have conversation around how do we make time for the things that are important to you in your life so that we don't overdo it, right? Because everything has a cost. Our time has value. And so we need to actually understand how we are paying attention to something, just like we would pay with money. We need to think about how we pay attention to one thing or another. Yeah. But we don't need to scare the crap out of kids and tell them, oh, technology is evil, it's melting your brain, stop playing video games. We need to have a rational discussion around this stuff and involve them in the conversation. So that's why this section in my book, Indistractable, how to raise indistractable kids, is all about how to involve them in the conversation, how to actually work with them to teach them what I think is the skill of the century. Because if you think the world is distracting now, oh my goodness, just wait a few years. The world is only going to become a more distracting place. So if you want to give your kid a huge life skill that they are going to need, that, I really believe that the world is going to bifurcate into people who let their time and attention be controlled by others, and people who control their time and attention for themselves. Those are the people who are going to control their life and make the kind of contributions that they can to the world. It's the people who can control their attention. So we have to teach them how to become indistractable. That is the skill of the century. It's more important than any subject they learn in school, is the ability to focus, the ability to master and control what we pay attention to will serve them in every domain of their life.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, Nir, I got to tell you, man, this has been the most, personally, this has been the most helpful podcast that I've ever done. And
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
I so appreciate you coming. Thank you for being on the show. Where can people find more about you, and where can they buy the book?
Sure. Yeah. So my blog is nirandfar.com. It's spelled N-I-R and far. And N-I-R is like my first name. So nirandfar.com. And if you go to nirandfar.com, there's actually a complimentary 80-page workbook that anybody can get for free. We actually made it available for free because we couldn't fit it into the final edition of the book. It was too long. So we made it available to everyone, this workbook that will help you become indistractable. Whether you buy the book or not, you can get that for free at nirandfar.com. And the book is called Indistractable: How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life.
Yes, but definitely Buy the book. I am
Yeah.
a believer in that. Buy the book. I have had such a great time. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, my pleasure, Mike. Thanks so much for having me. It was great talking to you.
Yes.
That was my conversation with Nir Eyal. I hope you had a great time checking that conversation out. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you catch your podcast. This is also a YouTube video, so you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok at just Mike Yates. And you just heard where you can find Nir. The best place is nirandfar.com. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the School Sucks podcast. I will see you on the next one.